Greetings, everyone. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we ran around the Barrens in the part 3 series of our second zones. In that one, we took Varrock, our orc warrior. We killed some centaurs. We killed some quillbore. We killed some possibly innocent zebra. In what was a fun romp through one of the most famous and or infamous lands in all of World of Warcraft Classic. We have also been reading the Horde Player's Guide, and we've gotten ourselves about 2/3 of the way through this book. It's been a pretty lore-heavy one, so it's taken us a little bit of time to get through. On the last time we looked through this, we wrapped up the 6th chapter out of 10. That one talked about different clans or associations in the races, and we talked about the Grim Totem tribe of the Tauren, a kind of evil sect that believes in Tauren first and everyone else last. So stay a while and listen as we now kick off chapter 7. This is called Horde History and Current Situation. So strap yourselves in. There's no way around it. This one is going to be quite a long episode. We're not going to read the entire chapter. We are going to chunk it up into parts, but the first real main part is very long indeed, and they don't break it down, and I'm guessing it's just pretty much a summary of everything that has happened up to now in the Horde. And as we know, because our channel, our episodes, our stories have grown, the story that is the Horde in this universe has grown, and so now it's starting to take quite some time to summarize it up. But we'll begin with a brief little state of the Horde. First, I would like to thank the wise warrior Atrig for his aid in compiling this information, especially on the history of the Horde. The war chief was kind enough to lend Atrig's services as a lore master to me for this work, and I feel that I could not have possibly done as complete a report without his aid. At Thrall's request, I have made a copy of this text for each of the leaders of the Horde, and he has given me his blessing to distribute copies to Jaina Proudmoore and to Rhonda Whisperwind as well. I will also retain my own copies of the work for use in the Explorers League. However, due to the nature of some of the information contained herein, I've agreed not to distribute it to every old lad in the Alliance. After all, I'm not trying to help orcs kill humans here, or vice versa. I believe both the Alliance and the Horde need to make some major changes in order to survive this bloody war. And you'll see more of what I mean here. My thanks as well to many other contributors to this text, though you are far too numerous to name. Leaders of the Horde, I humbly beseech you to pay heed to my words in this report. I know some among you believe my goal is to weaken and divide you, and I can give you only my word that this is the furthest from my intent. Read on and learn what I have learned. High Explorer Brand Bronzebeard of the Explorers Guild. That's sincerely by him. I think they had to make that caveat, not that that's the state of the Horde, but because we're about to get into such a detailed chronology of everything that's happened that it just wouldn't make sense in any way, shape, or form for brands to even in conversation acquire some of the information we're going to read. We also are going to have some sidebars. So let's begin before we get into the history with a little flavor text side story. Like most people, the young knight had little fondness for the sewers, and yet here he found himself. Having already been inside the tunnels for over an hour, he barely noticed the stench. Rather, it was the unidentifiable slime and goo that pooled on the floors and coated the walls that disturbed him. Soon it would be over, he told himself, though he was not entirely sure of the truth of that statement. He had convinced himself the guard would have to move eventually, having conveniently ignored the fact that said guard was not alive. He chanced to glance around the corner, confirming that the abomination still stood vigil over the next tunnel. Andoran had been to the Undercity only once before, not counting when it was still considered Lordaeron, of course. That time, he had led a large group of his fellow adventurers inside, through this very tunnel, launching a surprise strike at Varamathras while the Banshee Queen had been away in Northrend. That experience had given him a fair knowledge of the tunnels into the city, but they felt somehow larger and more intimidating without 50-odd companions by his side. It was no surprise then that he was having second thoughts about his chances. As his patience slipped and he reached for his blade, something caught his attention. Footsteps. Someone was approaching the abomination. He pressed himself back against the wall out of sight and listened. He could not make out the words spoken to the massive fleshy construct, but after a few moments the sound that followed was unmistakable. The guard was leaving, and swiftly, relieved but suspicious, not having heard the other footsteps depart. He waited. I know why you are here, Paladin. Okay, so that's interesting. I'm curious to see where that story will lead us, and perhaps we'll get snippets of it as we read this chapter. Little Alliance invasion of the Undercity. All right, here we go with the history of the Horde. Before the existence of the Horde, the races that represent most of it today had never even heard of each other, or in some cases, didn't even exist. The orcs, the traditional fathers of the Horde, slaughtered the few other creatures living on their world and turned to fighting each other. At this point, the only race they might have called allies was the ogres. At this time, only the single-headed ogres existed. They were massive, single-minded warriors who served as little more than walking siege engines for the orcs as they plundered and conquered. I have a lot more to say about the orcs and their role in the start of things, but let me touch on the other races briefly. The Forsaken did not exist at this point, and even half-ogres were all but unheard of, and thus there isn't much point in talking about what they did early on. The noble Tauren, on the other hand, have a long history. Before the coming of the Horde to Kalimdor, the Tauren fought a virtually eternal war against the Centaur, living their humble lives from day to day and camp to camp. Deeply shamanistic, probably even more so than the early orcs, the Tauren revered nature. This fact allowed them to maintain some level of peace with the Night Elves, whom they rarely encountered. The Night Elves and the Tauren were well aware of the others' existence at this time, and simply kept their distance, without war or any major trade. The Trolls, however, weren't so fond of elves. Hell, they still aren't. Not much has really changed there, although it's important to note that two different sorts of trolls belong to the Horde. The most plentiful, jungle trolls, are not the same group that worked with the fledgling Horde during its first days in Azeroth. In those days, the Forest Trolls, led by the mighty Zul'jin, spent much of their lives staging hit-and-run attacks on the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Once these trolls might have assaulted the elves directly, but the combined power of the humans and elf nations whittled the forest trolls down to a mere fraction of their old strength and power. While the forest trolls broke with the Horde after the Second War, recently a small tribe under their old leader Zul'jin has rejoined it. The trolls of the Darkspear tribe are an entirely different group. Before the Third War, they lived in the Broken Isles on an island near the Maelstrom, practicing their ancient cannibalistic variety of voodoo and tainted shamanism. The Darkspear tribe had few enemies. I suspect they fought with the Murlocs on occasion, or perhaps a Night Elf here and there, but generally these trolls were highly secluded and had very little contact with the remainder of the world. The Horde's history begins in Hellfire. Over 130 years ago, the shaman Ner'zhul was contacted by an extraplanar being called Kil'jaeden. It is unknown if Ner'zhul was tricked, much like the Night Elves had been, into thinking that Kil'jaeden was a god or spirit of some kind, or if the powerful shaman knew at the time of their meeting what he was dealing with, a demonic lord of the Burning Legion. Though he had dedicated much of his life to balance and nature, Ner'zhul was lulled by the Archdemon's offers of power and was convinced to abandon his teachings in favor of a new path, that of the Warlock. I cannot know if he believed he could use his power to help his people, or if his reasons were entirely selfish. The consequences, however, were dire, regardless of Ner'zhul's intent. Once he had learned the basics of manipulating this new infernal magic, his fame grew, and others abandoned the old ways to follow his new, quicker path to the manipulation of the natural world. Okay, quick pause to note some things here. One, we'd have to check the chronology to see if the first contact between the Burning Legion and the Orcs was 130 years ago, and I know Ner'zhul is dead, but that's all relatively recently, so is Ner'zhul really living over 100 years? Is he really whatever, even by the time of his death, 120 or so plus years old? Because nothing has given us any reason to believe that orcs live any longer than humans, so that would be semi-crazy. It'd be certainly notable. Second, we do know he was tricked, and Kil'jaeden eventually appeared in the form of an ancestor. It took nearly 50 years before Ner'zhul realized his error. By this time he had convinced many to follow his dark path, and the orcs waged war against the Draenei. Ner'zhul helped in the first efforts to unify the Horde into a cohesive unit, but when he saw what had become of his race and what it was still becoming, he denied Kil'jaeden. He refused to compel the orcs to drink demon blood. It was far too late. Kil'jaeden, furious, found a new pawn in the form of Gul'dan, one of Ner'zhul's strongest apprentices, who shared none of his master's honor or compassion. Where Ner'zhul had been held back by a lingering feeling of guilt and regret, Gul'dan's greed and ambition allowed him to grow even more powerful and cruel than his former master. He became Kil'jaeden's instrument of destruction on Draenor, leading the newly founded Horde to levels of brutality never previously conceived of by the orc race. He did not have Ner'zhul's compunctions and convinced the orcs to drink the blood of the demonic pit lord Manaroth the Destructor, which irrevocably tainted the orcs who consumed it. With their aggression heightened by demon blood, the Draenei were no match for the orcs. The ensuing slaughter united the orcs under a single mantle for the first time. The Horde was born from this bloodshed. Gul'dan continued to influence the Horde from the sidelines, but he still desired yet more power and influence. To this end, with Kil'jaeden's assistance, he founded the dreaded Shadow Council. The Shadow Council was a collection of the most vicious warlocks the Horde had to offer. They willingly followed Gul'dan and united these warlocks. They found it easy to bend the leaders and common orcs of the Horde alike to their will. The overwhelming majority of the Horde did not even know of the Shadow Council's existence, and that was their greatest strength. At this point, Kil'jaeden, pleased with the orcs, cut off contact with them and with Gul'dan. Without significant enemies to fight, the orcs turned on each other. Gul'dan realized that unless he found a new enemy for the Horde, it would consume itself. Soon after this, Gul'dan was contacted by a powerful being known as Medivh, the possessed human mage we all know and love, offering a world called Azeroth that was ripe for the picking. Medivh even created a dark portal connecting the two worlds. Gul'dan orchestrated the orcs to bring their army, the now massive Horde, through the portal. The construction and use of the first dark portal marked the beginning of the Horde's invasion of Azeroth, and thus the start of the First War. By this time, a large percentage of the orc race had been affected by the taint of demons, and they were thoroughly under the sway of Kil'jaeden and his followers. This is not to say there were no virtuous orcs at this time. Many heroes of the First War refused any contact with the demons, or were blissfully ignorant of their existence. The first assaults against the humans lulled the orcs into a false sense of security. The orcs expected every settlement to have warriors. The farms they slaughtered on their initial invasion made the orcs believe that all humans were like the simple farmers they swiftly put to the axe. Thinking an easy victory was at hand, the orcs moved toward Stormwind at Gul'dan's urging. Gul'dan believed if he took Stormwind, Medivh would grant him the location of the Tomb of Sargeras. Stormwind proved an overwhelming shock to the Horde. The footmen, guarding the city's entrance, put up the first fight the orcs had seen, but they still managed to push their way through the gates. By the time they realized that this minimal resistance was a trap, it was far too late. Armored warriors riding beasts of pure muscle and sinew, creatures we know as horses, flanked the Horde's disorganized group, crushing warriors under the hooves of their mounts and striking down even the mightiest of orcs with their lances and blades. The orcs learned to call these mounted warriors knights and cursed the world that had cost them victory for the first time. Shamed, the orcs retreated, hounded by the leaders of the Brotherhood of the Horse every step of the way. Gul'dan concealed the final steps of the orc retreat with a wall of impenetrable fog. This simple spell may have saved the Horde from complete destruction. Furious, the war chiefs blamed each other for the failure, and the Horde's fractured remains threatened to tear each other apart. Gul'dan knew he needed to act quickly to salvage what he could. To this end, he convinced the Shadow Council to do something unheard of. Blackhand the Destroyer was named War Chief of the Horde. He would lead the entirety of the orc race, not just his own already formidable clan. Many challenged the mighty Blackhand in these early days, but all were crushed either by Blackhand's own prowess or Gul'dan's shadowy enforcers. Another unusual creature emerged from the darkness at this time, Garona, the now legendary assassin. Garona was a lowly servant of Gul'dan, tasked with recording the war in writing. The mighty orc warriors held little value in reading and writing, and the warlocks had little interest in spending their time chronicling history. Garona was a half-orc, but to this day I cannot say what her other parent was. We had thought her to be half-human early on, but she was already a young woman at this time. It would seem impossible for a human and an orc to have produced her, but her features did not match those of the Draenei or any other known race. So now we're in a nebulous state where they're starting to realize, okay, with our chronology, it can't make sense that she's half human, but they don't know how to call her half Draenei yet. The Blackrock clan. The Blackrock clan was the first through the portal, and the mightiest, this is a sidebar, of all clans in the First War. Led by Blackhand the Destroyer, the Blackrock clan later splintered into smaller but still formidable pieces after his death at the hands of Orgrim Doomhammer. Those orcs who remained with the main body of the Blackrock clan were frantically loyal to Orgrim. Others eventually followed the sons of Blackhand, Rend, and Maim, and they formed the Blacktooth Grin clan. Though the majority of the clan was slaughtered in the Second War, Rend Blackhand returned from the shadows and seized control of the clan after Doomhammer's death. Rend has now pledged his service to Lord Victor Nefarious, also known as Nefarien, or Blackwing, the son of Deathwing, and he resides in his clan's namesake fortress of Blackrock Spire. This is perhaps the largest body of orcs remaining in the world that do not belong to Thrall's Horde. The Blackrock clan still counts a few warlocks among its numbers, and thus they are likely allied with the Burning Blade and other groups that retain some demonic influence. The Blackrock clan's color was red. Okay, so that just goes to explain how there is this entire non-Horde orc faction still out there in Blackrock Mountain, why that mountain is full of them, and where the other evil orcs that we're seeing in the world, such as the Burning Blade orcs, where they're most likely coming from. The humans proved to have even more tricks up their sleeves. The Archmagi of the Kirin Tor and the Priests of Northshire added much-needed magical support to the human armies as the battle was joined in earnest. It seemed that the catastrophic assault on Stormwind may have cost the orcs too much, but at a key point in the battles, the mighty Anduin Lothar disappeared. In Lothar's absence, the human forces were left with inferior leadership and fell back to Stormwind's walls. Anduin returned for only a short time, routing the orcs briefly before disappearing again. The orcs learned later that he had first sought the Tome of Lost Divinity in the Dead Mines, but his second departure was far more significant. With help from Garona and the apprentice mage Khadgar, Lothar slew his lifelong friend, the traitor Medivh, in his tower. Gul'dan attempted to wrest the secret of Sargeras' tomb from Medivh's mind as the Guardian died, but a psychic backlash slammed Gul'dan as Medivh perished. I don't think he meant that. Oh, I do. Never mind. Okay. Never mind. Yeah. At the same time, Garona infiltrated Stormwind, where she assassinated the mighty King Lane Rin before Lothar had a chance to return. With the king slain, morale fell, and Stormwind fell with it. Lothar arrived only in time to gather the surviving forces and retreat to the north. The orcs had won the first war. Victory cost the orcs much. While Gul'dan remained comatose, Orgrim Doomhammer gained the title of Backstabber by slaying Blackhand and taking the mantle of Warchief of the Horde. While Orgrim was unusually loyal for an orc, he had uncovered the existence of the Shadow Council and the truth about their manipulations of Blackhand. Doomhammer led a surprise assault on the Citadel where the Shadow Council resided and slaughtered nearly every warlock. Gul'dan awoke with a blade at his neck and was forced to pledge his fealty to Doomhammer, whispering promises of vengeance under his breath. And we'll take another sidebar to discuss that Blacktooth Grin clan we talked about. This clan formed from a splinter of the Blackrock clan after the death of Blackhand. Led by Rend and Maim, this clan represented those orcs who did not trust Doomhammer or wished for vengeance against him, but were unwilling to strike against him directly. The clan's name comes from their tradition of knocking out one of their own teeth as a sign of loyalty. As the clan charged with the protection of the Dark Portal, they were almost all destroyed at the end of the Second War. While Rend survived and slipped into the shadows, it is unknown if his brother died here or also survived. Some rumors say that Maim retreated with Kilrog Deadeye to Draenor, only to die there to human blades or betrayal. The Blacktooth Grin clan's color was black. And I don't know, I feel like we read about the death of Maim, but I may be wrong. Maybe he did die in Beyond the Dark Portal. The orcs followed the humans north, enjoying the conquest of yet more land. The fledgling alliance rose to combat them, but the Horde, too, proved capable of finding allies. The forest trolls had long hated the humans and elves, but proud Zul'jin initially refused to join with the Horde. This changed when the troll leader was captured by human forces in Hillsbrad and rescued at Doomhammer's command. With trolls, ogres, and orcs fighting side by side, it was not long before the enterprising goblins saw the potential profit in aiding them. Dark magic brought the Horde the remainder of their allies. Now we are getting into the thick of the Second War. Gul'dan was furious at the slaughter of his council, but he found little difficulty in training others to follow his path. Kil'jaeden whispered secrets to him, again for the first time since Medivh's coming. And at the Demon Lord's coaxing, he learned to command the dead. Gul'dan learned to stretch his consciousness into the great dark beyond and found the souls of his fellow warlocks eagerly awaiting a new host. His first attempts at resurrection and raising the dead met with failure. The flesh of his necrolytes and apprentice warlocks proved too weak to house the spirits of these ancient warlocks. When the Horde laid siege to Caer Darrow, they were repelled for a time by a massive artifact, a powerful runestone enchanted with ancient magic of unknown origin. Gul'dan perverted the artifact, slicing it into great slabs to construct the first altar of storms. Gul'dan called his minions to the altar, sacrificing many of them in dark rituals to ensure his success. His efforts were not without fruit. Gul'dan first experimented with the living and used the runestone's magic to create a new breed of warlock that would not so easily fall to Doomhammer's swords, the Ogre Magi. Cho'Gall, the first of these new ogres, was fanatically loyal to Gul'dan for his gift. Together the two created yet more Ogre Magi and prepared for the next step of their plan. Doomhammer, having betrayed his own master, was highly suspicious of others. Gul'dan convinced him that Rend and Maim, the sons of Blackhand, planned to turn against him. Doomhammer disbanded Rem and Maim's legions of raiders and dispersed them to save his own hide, but this weakened the Horde's mounted cavalry in the process. Gul'dan, of course, had the solution. He would create an army of undead riders loyal only to Doomhammer. The concept pleased the war chief, although he clearly did not trust the warlock, and with good reason. This situation bought Gul'dan time, however, and while his initial experiments with Cho'Gall failed, the two gathered orcs and ogres around them, forming the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans. More on that in a moment. As time went on, Orgrim demanded results. Gul'dan, not yet prepared for war with the war chief, searched desperately for a solution. He realized he had been working with only the bodies of his own ground troops. He needed trained riders with bodies built for mounted combat. In a stroke of insane genius, he placed the spirit of one of his former companions, Terran Gorfiend, in the corpse of a mighty human knight. To his surprise, Gorfiend took control of the body and, perhaps more importantly, still proved capable of channeling dark magic while his spirit was encased in the skeletal shell. Thus, the first Death Knight was born. Alright, let's do some sidebars on the Stormreaver and Twilight Hammer clan. Okay, so Stormreaver clan. When Doomhammer crushed the Shadow Council, Gul'dan was forced to pledge his service to the new warchief of the Horde. This did nothing to ensure the warlock's safety, however, and the former leader of the Shadow Council drew power-hungry orcs to him to form his own clan, simply to give him some measure of protection from the remainder of the Horde. These would-be warlocks harbored little loyalty for Gul'dan, but their desire for power led them to sacrifice their lives in his service. He trained a select few in dark magic, but most of the clan served as little more than fodder or bodies for his experiments. When the orcs lost at the Dark Portal, Gul'dan brought his clan to the Tomb of Sargeras, where they were slaughtered by the Tomb's guardians. There are rumors, true ones in fact, that one or two warlocks survived, but the clan has no meaningful presence in the modern world. The Stormreaver clan's color was blue, and the Twilight's Hammer clan. This unusual clan was formed by Cho'Gall, the leader of the Ogre Magi and loyal follower of Gul'dan. This gave the Twilight's Hammer a strong tie with the Stormreaver clan, although their methods and goals proved much different. While the Stormreavers emulated the secretive ways of the old Shadow Council, the Twilight's Hammer proved to be a destructive juggernaut, nearly unstoppable in battle. The ogres and orcs of the Twilight's Hammer embraced raw fury, enjoying the feeling of annihilating everything in their path. They remained loyal to the Horde for a time, only because it gave them a means to focus their slaughter. As the Horde weakened and the Stormreavers died, the remainder of the Twilight's Hammer abandoned both. It is likely that Cho'Gall died defending Gul'dan at the Tomb of Sargeras, but the Twilight's Hammer retreated for a time, rebuilding its forces and biding its time. While the truth behind how this happened remains a mystery, the modern Twilight's Hammer retains the destructive nature of Cho'Gall's clan, but almost nothing else. Somehow, one of the old gods has managed to make this clan its pawn, and since that time the clan's numbers and power have dramatically increased. Even humans and other former members of the Alliance flocked to join the service of the Elemental Lords and help bring about the complete destruction of Azeroth. The largest groups of the Twilight's Hammer now camp near the locations where they believe the old gods and their minions are sealed away. Many wait for Cthulhu's awakening in Silithus, and others revere Ragnaros in the Black Rock depths alongside the Dark Iron Dwarves. The Twilight's Hammer clan's color was violet. Okay, so we know, in fact, Chokal did live. We also know that he is the tie to the old gods. He is the one that is enticed by them. There's also a divide. There is a difference between the old gods and the elemental lords. Ragnaros is something separate from the old gods. He's a separate power. And there's been some retconning as to why the Twilight's Hammer might serve Ragnaros, and we'll see how those quests go. But I would imagine you could easily just chalk it up to anything else, anyone that serves the old gods. Any of their motives is just simply, well, we're doing this now because we believe it will help create chaos and destruction for much of the world, because that's their ultimate goal. Even with the Death Knights and Ogre Magi, the Horde suffered many defeats early in the Second War. This could partially be attributed to the strength of the newly formed Knights of the Silver Hand, but the main reason was far more blatant. The Alliance had air support. The mighty Wildhammer Dwarves of Airy Peak rained lightning from the heavens on the helpless ground forces of the Horde, evading the counterattacks of the Horde spellcasters and troll axe throwers. The veterans of the war knew the Horde desperately needed their own beasts of the skies, but found none to answer their call. Okay, let's go back to that side story. We get to come back now and look about what's happening to our Alliance members that are infiltrating the Undercity. The voice was hollow and cold, one of the Forsaken. Not surprising considering this was their home, but Andoran was a bit miffed that he had been discovered so quickly. He couldn't even see the figure who was addressing him since he or she was still around the corner. For the moment, Andoran contented himself to listen as the Forsaken continued to speak.
Worry not, mortal. The Queen's minions do not know of your presence here. Not yet. And I will choose not to inform them. You are willing to assist me.
There was a moment of silence following this statement, as if the figure awaited a response. So be it. Andoran stepped forward and turned to the tunnel entrance, regarding the figure in front of him. The figure wore the robes of a priest of the Holy Light. Not uncommon among the Forsaken, who mocked the order by wearing their garments and allowing the sacred robes to be soiled and tainted by their bloody work. Somehow Andoran sensed this figure was different. The robes seemed to be in almost tolerable condition, even if the body wearing them was not. The man wearing the robes was clearly long dead, having been reduced to little more than a skeleton. How and why would I assist you? Andoran asked. He took no pleasure in the idea of working with one of the undead and expected to be stabbed in the back if he accepted, but he was a man of honor, and he would hear the creature out. The knight took no offensive action, noting that the cleric in front of him appeared unarmed.
I fear we have no time for stories of why, nor even detailed introductions. Suffice to say that though my own name may have rotted with time, I remember those of my friends, notably Leonid Bartholomew, someone I believe you know well yourself. Though I initially felt indebted to the Banshee Queen, he paused for a moment, seeming to scoff at the name, for freeing us from the mindless servitude of the Lich King. I realized we had simply traded unconscious slavery for a conscious variety of the same. Thus I have made the decision to follow my old friend's example. I know why you are here, and I will help you. In exchange, I would ask that you speak on my behalf with the Argent Dawn and help me perform another task.
Andoran considered his words. Seemed too simple. I do indeed know Bartholomew the Revered, and your request seems reasonable enough. But what of this other task? He made no attempt to hide his skepticism, and the priest did not seem to mind. In fact, the knight would have been certain that the Forsaken smiled if the creature had flesh to twist into a grin.
You have come here to free a prisoner, Commander Lightblade. I would have you set another person free.
Okay, so interesting here that we now see that member is not really a member of the Alliance, but a member of the Argent Dawn, which is a kind of a neutral faction that's real focus is just let's destroy all undead. Then an orc chieftain, the shaman Zulahed, through mysterious resources, uncovered an ancient talisman said to be capable of tremendous wonders. The only trouble was that it did not respond to shamanistic spell work, no matter how great Zulahed's effort. That led Zulahed to turn to the only warlock he felt he could trust, a warrior loyal to the Dragonmaw clan. Thus, Nekros inherited the demon soul. With this object, the orc was able to call upon great feats of magical power, but the soul's true secret was the power to control dragons. In time, even the mighty Alexstrasza, the Dragon Queen, succumbed to the power of the demon soul. Chained within Grim Batal, Nekros forced her to produce an army to serve as the airborne cavalry of the Horde. The Red Dragonflight served the orcs, knowing their queen would be destroyed if they did not, with only a handful managing to escape or resist. Zulahed the Whack took credit for Nekros' victory, and his Dragonmaw clan led the Reds to war. With the dragons at the orcs' sides, the Second War ground to a near stalemate, but somehow the Knights of the Silver Hand and their allies managed to push the Citadel Blackrock Spire, led by none other than the champion Anduin Lothar. Let's take a sideboard and read about the Dragonmaw clan. Though it was a warlock with the demon soul who enslaved the Dragon Queens, few would take a cripple for their war chief no matter how skilled. Zulahed the Whacked, one of the few remaining shaman of the Horde, took the credit for enslaving the dragons. He was the chieftain of the Dragonmaw clan, a small clan that existed before the creation of the Horde, and one of those had a few shaman among its ranks. Nearly all of the tribe's members knew the truth about the Dragon Queen, but Zulahed proved a capable enough leader to prove he deserved command over the Dragonflight. And Nekros controlled the dragons with great cunning and ruthlessness. The Dragonmaw clan was loyal to Blackhand before his death, and they pledged their loyalty to the Blacktooth Grin clan when it formed. When the Blacktooth Grin clan fell at the Dark Portal, none of the Dragonmaw clan was still at Grim Batal. They remained one of the only clans that survived the Second War. After the Second War concluded, they controlled the Red Dragonflight for some time before a human mage led a group of adventurers to Grim Batal with the aid of one of the Dragon Queen's consorts and a small army of dwarves. Ronan the mage defeated Nekros and destroyed the demon soul with a scale from Deathwing, the aspect of the Black Dragonflight. Most of the Dragonmaw clan fell in battle, but a few survived to hound the dwarves and humans near Menethil Harbor today. Nekrosh, the son of Nekros, leads the survivors. The Dragonmaw clan's color was white, and if you would like to hear that story, if you haven't already, that is in the Day of the Dragon, a book we've read on this channel. Lothar was separated from the main body of his troops in this, perhaps one of the greatest of all of Azeroth's battles. Amid the chaos, he fought with Orgrim Doomhammer. Some say he was defeated in single combat. Others claim that he was ambushed and slain by a group. Regardless, his blade fell from his dead grasp, though it did not lie cold for long. One of Lothar's lieutenants, Terralion, took up his rallying cry for Lothar, which spread among the troops of the Alliance until the piercing howl struck fear even into the hearts of the mighty orcs. Terralion's unbridled assault pushed the Horde back again and again, forcing them all the way to the Dark Portal. And we do know, in fact, that Lothar was defeated in that combat. Somewhere around this time, the chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, Duratan, learned the truth of Gul'dan's contact with demons. He spoke against Gul'dan, and the Horde banished his clan to the frozen tundra of the Alterac Mountains in punishment. In time, he gathered more information and proof and sought Orgrim Doomhammer. He explained to Doomhammer the truth about Kil'jaeden, and Doomhammer believed him and sent Duratan off for a few days with an armed escort while he considered what to do. One of the guards, however, was a traitor. He called in assassins who killed Duratan and his wife, leaving only their infant child alive. Lord Adelis Blackmore, a cunning man, found the babe in the forest and took the orc child as a slave, naming him Thrall. So let's take a sidebar and read about that Frostwolf clan. The loyal and shamanistic Frostwolf clan, led by Duratan, came through the portal and fought bravely in the First and Second Wars. After their banishment from the Horde and the assassination of their chieftain, the clan was led for a time by Drekthar, an ancient and wise shaman. Drekthar organized the day-to-day activities of the clan, but he never assumed the title of chieftain. The shaman also created a strong tie between his clan and the native White Wolves of the mountains. They were different from the large Black Wolves the Horde had worked with, but the White Wolves proved equally loyal. When the young Thrall fled Adelis Blackmore and reunited with his clan, he trained with Drekthar and learned the ways of his clan, undergoing many trials before learning the ways of the shaman and taking on the mantle of the clan. When Thrall took command of the Horde as a whole, the Frostwolf clan joined. Like all clans that joined the Horde, the Frostwolf clan no longer exists as a separate entity. Many former members of the clan still reside in the clan's old territory. The Frostwolf clan's colors were blue and white. Okay. At the Dark Portal, the orcs stood proud, with Doomhammer refusing to retreat through the swirling gateway. As the battle raged on, Khadgar, once an apprentice of Medivh and now the Archmage of Nethergard, began to channel the greatest destructive spell seen since the days of Aegwynn. Thousands had died that day, but as a glow appeared in the sky above the portal, human and orc alike stopped for a moment to watch and wonder in anticipation. The pillar of light that Khadgar called pierced the portal and sundered it, shattering the massive gateway and the morale of the orcs along with it. Kilrog Deadeye of the Bleeding Hollow clan led a retreat. The alliance captured all others, including the war chief Orgrim Doomhammer. And let's read the sidebar about the Bleeding Hollow clan. Perhaps the second largest of the clans in the First War, the Bleeding Hollow followed the fearsome warrior Kilrog Deadeye with unquestioned loyalty. When the Second War began, the Bleeding Hollow had the most surviving veterans of any clan, and they were tasked with taking the dwarven lands of Cosmodan. Kilrog's forces pushed the dwarves back to Ironforge, but as Turalyon reached Blackrock Spire, the clan's loyalty forced it to retreat to aid Doomhammer and the other clans at the Dark Portal. The Bleeding Hollow fought until the Dark Portal was sundered, but the aging Kilrog refused to surrender even after Doomhammer was captured. He led the surviving orcs in retreat, eventually finding a way to open a new portal and return to Draenor. On Draenor, the Bleeding Hollow clan led the old clans of Draenor into battle against the humans who followed them. It is said that Kilrog Deadeye perished in the final battle against Khadgar and Draenor, but his body was never found. The Bleeding Hollow clan's color was green. I don't know if he's really dead, I can't remember. As the humans pursued Kilrog's remaining forces, Gul'dan led the remainder of his clan to the tomb of Sargeras. No longer willing to wait to claim his godhood, there he released the demons within the tomb and a mighty battle ensued. It is unknown what demon finally took the warlock's life, but only a handful of his clan lived to tell the tale. I'm thankful Gul'dan never found the Eye of Sargeras. I'm thankful it's likely this world would have been shattered if he had succeeded in his goal. Kaylin, let's read about the clans of Draenor, the ones that stayed behind, essentially, or that never came over. Nearly as many clans remained on Draenor as came to Azeroth. Few of them survived Draenor's destruction intact, but a few members of each clan probably still live to this day. And this is also representative of the ones that you can see in the Beyond the Dark Portal expansion. There's the Shadow Moon clan, led by the ancient shaman Ner'zhul. The Shadow Moon was the dominant clan on Draenor. Their clan focused on the use of magic. The Shadow Moon was heavily influenced by ancient shamanistic principles and exemplified the raw power of dark orc magic. Their color was black. The Warsong clan, led by the near-invincible Grom Hellscream, the Warsong clan is known to sing and shout as they tear their way through their opposition. Loyal, they eagerly awaited Ner'zhul's order to invade Azeroth, but it never came. When it became evident that their world was about to be destroyed, Hellscream led his clan through the portal into Azeroth, where they survived in the wilds and slaughtered any humans they encountered. When it came time to free the other clans from enslavement, the Warsongs were the first into the battle, singing their mighty battle hymns as they finally had the chance to engage the humans in earnest. Though their chieftain fell in battle in the Third War, the Warsong clan remains a loyal part of the modern Horde. Their color was red. The Shattered Hand clan. The Shattered Hand are often viewed as insane, even by the other clans, for they practice rituals of self-mutilation. Upon reaching his status as a warrior, an orc of the Shattered Hand broke or removed his hand, often replacing it with a weapon like his chieftain, Kargath Bladefist. The color of the Shattered Hand was white. The Thunderlord clan. The Thunderlord clan represented some of the best mounted cavalry in any clan. They had strong connections to the Blackrock clan, in fact. Orgrim Doomhammer initially rose to power as a member of this clan. Fenris the Hunter led these wolf riders into battle. Their color was violet. The Laughing Skull clan. One of the only two clans led by an ogre, the Laughing Skull was the least trusted of any clan. They were thieves, assassins, and brigands with little control. It is unlikely many or any of the Laughing Skulls survived the battles on Draenor. Their color was yellow. The Bone Chewer clan. These terrifying cannibals ornamented themselves with bones and ruined organs of their foes. Led by Tagar Spinebreaker, they were one of the most vicious and well-respected clans on Draenor before its implosion. Their fate after the destruction of Draenor is unknown. Their color was green. Many of these clans can also be explored in a different light in Warlords of Draenor. Kilrog Deadeye, the last orc hero of the first war, led his people to another portal to Draenor. I'm still not sure how it was created, but I've been told the orcs gathered several artifacts in order to summon the portal for their retreat. The Alliance, fearful that the Horde would return with greater numbers later on, sent some of their bravest to follow Kilrog through the portal. With the Alliance hot on their heels, the Bleeding Hollow clan reunited with the orcs who had remained on Draenor, and they braced themselves for a new battle. Kilrog found the orcs of Draenor under the control of Ner'zhul, the ancient shaman who had once refused Kil'jaeden. Many ancient clans were still strong in Draenor, and the humans found themselves outnumbered. Ner'zhul was quick to put Kilrog's experience to good use, and they coordinated to devise the best possible tactics to defeat the humans. The fighting on Draenor had not raged for long before Ner'zhul made an unusual decision that would change the course of history. The shaman no longer found Azeroth or Draenor suitable for his people, and so he used his immense power to open another portal, and another, each to a different world potentially ripe for conquest. What the crazy bastard didn't realize was that Draenor couldn't handle that many portals at once. Oops. The world began to tear itself apart. Khadgar and the humans who had followed the orcs through the portal thought that was pretty keen at first, until they realized that if Draenor exploded, the explosion might leak back through their world and hit Azeroth as well, and we know he didn't intentionally do that. That was an accident. He being Ner'zhul. The humans set up camp at the last portal back to Azeroth and defended it with their lives, not to protect the portal, but to shield Khadgar as he prepared the spell to destroy it. Nearly every human was slain as the orcs turned their full might upon the small group, but their lives bought the Archmage enough time to finish the spell and shatter the portal. With no known world to retreat to, the orcs and humans alike likely fled to a random portal, or failed and died in the blast as Draenor combusted. What remained of the orcs' homeworld was a blasted continent of floating red rocks in the twisting nether, with only a handful of survivors, most of whom were horribly wounded. The fate of most of the heroes of that battle, orc and human alike, remains a mystery. There's one exception that we know all too well. Kil'jaeden plucked Ner'zhul and his followers from Draenor after they entered one of their portals and stuffed him into Northrend, where he became the Lich King. Many orcs slipped through the portal to Azeroth before Khadgar's forces set up their defending perimeter. Among them was Grom Hellscream, who brought a large chunk of the Warsong clan through the portal. The Warsong clan became a nuisance for the humans, who had placed most of the remaining orcs in internment camps rather than simply slaughtering them. During this time, the family of one of Lord of Delos Blackmore's servants raised Thrall for the first few years of his life. These fleeting years were more kind to Thrall than the next score. The young daughter of the servant's family befriended him and treated him as a younger brother. Her name was Taratha, and she was the closest thing to family that Thrall ever had. Sadly, Thrall was torn away from the servant family as soon as he was old enough to begin his scholastic training, and even that was brief. He was taught the basics of how to read before his military training would begin. Blackmore intended to use Thrall as a gladiator at first, but later developed a much darker plan to give himself power over the Alliance. As the young Thrall trained, Grom Hellscream fought his guerrilla war, and Doomhammer escaped from Varian Rin. Doomhammer did not immediately join the rebel clans, rather he became a hermit and spent his days in contemplation. Such was the way of many warriors who were not ready to give up the fight, but neither did they have the strength left to rally the fragments of the Horde. Alright, let's back sidebar again to our story going on in the Undercity. The unarmed priest, Trevor, hurled himself on top of one death guard and pummeled it viciously, while Andurin drew his blade to deal with the other. The 7 runes on the weapon's blade sprang to life, bathing the sword in holy fire. His first stroke shattered the death guard's steel, the second severed the monster's neck. He could not afford to allow the guard to shout in alarm. By the time he had dealt with the first guard, the second had pinned Trevor to the floor and stabbed its dagger into the priest's shoulder. Andurin turned and ran his blade through the back of its head. It passed through as if tearing tissue paper. Andurin offered Trevor a hand to stand, only realizing afterward how awkward it was to help one of the Forsaken to his feet.
You wear the robes of a priest, Trevor. Why do you not channel the light in battle if you seek redemption?
The priest seemed to wince at that.
While I refuse to wield the shadow, the light has refused me, or so it seems. So I am truly a broken man. I learned to wield the spears of light in the first war, not a solid weapon like Uther's knights did in the second. Without the light, I'm unarmed and unarmored, but not entirely helpless, as you see.
Anduin couldn't help but feel a little bit sorry for the fallen priest, if his story was true. Perhaps a man, no matter how virtuous, could not channel holy power while in such a form. And we know from our characters in WoW that that's not true. Thrall's arena matches grew more brutal as time went on, and he eventually fled with help from his human sister. He first sought the internment camps, getting captured and observing them from the inside, but finding it amazingly simple to escape. The orcs had fallen into a pitiful state of apathy. Few resisted capture. Thrall investigated, eventually seeking out the legendary Grom Hellscream. After proving himself to Grom, Thrall learned that the orcs were in withdrawal. They had grown dependent on the demonic magics wrought by Gul'dan and his servants. Grom also told Thrall about the young orcs' rightful clan, the Frostwolves, and Thrall sought them out, vowing to return and work with the mighty chieftain when he could. Let's take a sidebar again and read about Atrigg and Fordring. This is also in a book that we read on this channel. Their story comes in, I want to say it's Of Blood and Honor. It was the shorter novella, the only book by Chris Metzen out there that I know of. After the Second War, the orc Atrigg, an experienced warrior who was beginning to feel the effects of his age, settled in the ruins of an abandoned tower. He lived in peace until by chance a Knight of the Silver Hand approached. Both being veterans of the Second War, they fought to an impasse. Unfortunately, a section of the tower collapsed on the knight and interrupted their duel. Falling rubble knocked the knight senseless. Atrigg held no animosity for the injured man who had fought with honor. The orc rescued him from the collapsing tower and tied him to his horse's saddle, trusting that the steed would carry him home. Atrigg sent the horse on its way, and it did indeed return the knight to his camp. The knight, Tyrion Fordring, would never forget Atrigg's mercy. When other knights came in search of Atrigg after finding Tyrion unconscious, the knight attempted to convince them to leave the old orc be, but his efforts were futile. Atrigg was captured, too weary from his battle with the paladin to put up a fight. Rather than allow the orc to be executed, Tyrion broke his oath to the knighthood and tried to free Atrigg. Tyrion's attempt was hopeless, and he failed. Atrigg remained imprisoned and sentenced to death, and the knights imprisoned Fordring as well for his treachery. Soon after, Uther Lightbringer stripped him of his rank and his ability to call upon the light and exiled Tyrion. Unbeknownst to Tyrion, Thrall and the Horde had mobilized to free Atrigg and were marching on the camp. Tyrion, banished and stripped of his powers, armor, and weapons, threw himself at the guards around the stockade where Atrigg was about to hang. He knew his battle was hopeless, but then Thrall and the Horde appeared, clashing their weapons and shouting their war cries. The distraction allowed Tyrion to free Atrigg, who fell unconscious, badly hurt. Tyrion, in spite of Uther's actions, was able to call upon the light to heal the noble orc. The two went their separate ways. Tyrion now resides in the Plaguelands watching over his son, and Atrigg serves as one of Thrall's advisors in Orgrimmar. Atrigg's story is significant because it shows that humans and orcs of honor can work together and sacrifice for each other. The Battle of Mount Hyjal was a great tribute to their example. I would like to live long enough to see it happen again. It's also notable because it shows that you cannot strip someone of the light against their will. They can tap it. It's more about their own journey. Thrall nearly died of the cold trying to reach the Frostwolves, and they concealed their surprise at being reunited with the heir to their chieftain. The Frostwolves, now led by the Dark Shaman Drekthar, tested Thrall, or not the Dark Shaman, just the Shaman, tested Thrall before accepting him into the clan. After he proved himself, he trained as a shaman. One day, a cloaked warrior wandered into the camp and the Frostwolves offered him hospitality. Thrall thought the warrior was insulting him and his clan, and he challenged the traveler. The other orcs gasped as the wanderer threw off his cloak to reveal black plate and a massive hammer. Thrall, unaware who he faced, defeated the wanderer in a brief duel. The warrior then laughed and revealed himself to be Orgrim Doomhammer, the Horde's war chief. He made the mighty Thrall his second, and together they planned to assault the human camps and show their brothers how to fight again. Thrall reunited with Grom, and the three mighty warriors led the orcs in reclaiming the prisoners of war. Blackmoor hounded Thrall at every turn, and finally Thrall turned his growing horde toward Blackmoor's forces at Durnhold Keep and crushed him. Orgrim Doomhammer fell in the fighting, and Thrall took his place as war chief of the Horde. The Horde avoided conflict with the Alliance as much as possible for a time, sacking only the prisoner camps until a mysterious visitor, the Prophet Medivh, visited Thrall and told him that his people would find a home in the west, on the forgotten continent of Kalimdor. While we do not know how Medivh returned to this world, he made his offer to many, hoping to bring enough strength to Kalimdor to protect the World Tree when the Burning Legion arrived. Thrall was one of few who heeded Medivh's warnings, and he took the majority of the Horde across the sea, meeting with the Darkspear trolls and allying with them on the way. When Thrall reached Kalimdor, the orcs encountered the shamanistic Tauren, led by Cairn Bloodhoof. The two races allied, since the Tauren were in need of aid against the Centaur, and the orcs needed friends and guides in this foreign land. They found that their people were similar, but the Tauren had fortunately not lost so many to the study of dark magic. After aiding the Tauren against the Centaur, Thrall and Grom split up for a short time, while Grom's clan went to gather supplies in Ashenvale Forest. When the orcs took their axes to the ancient trees, the Night Elves responded, seeing it as an attack on nature. Hellscream fought a downhill battle against the elves, but just as the last of his troops were about to be defeated, a familiar figure entered the scene. Mannoroth the Destructor. Mannoroth secretly offered Hellscream a chance to regain his former fury and power, enough for his people to defeat the elves and their demigod Cenarius, if Grom was willing to drink from a well tainted with Mannoroth's blood. Grom knew the price of his actions, but he was not willing to lose in battle. He and his troops drank from the fell-tainted water and were imbued with demonic strength. They slew Cenarius and many elves in their berserker rage. After battle, Mannoroth revealed himself to Grom and asserted his dominance. There he is. As Grom succumbed to the will of the Burning Legion, Medivh visited Thrall again. Thrall's orcs united with Jaina Proudmoore's human forces at Medivh's request, and together they captured Grom's spirit and freed him from his demonic taint. Thrall and Grom then went alone to seek their vengeance against Mannoroth. The two defeated the Pit Lord, but Grom suffered a mortal wound after saving Thrall's life. Thrall grieved for his friend, whom he had seen as a brother, but he knew that the orc's sacrifice had not been in vain. As the Burning Legion and the Scourge took more of Kalimdor, the orcs and humans allied with the Night Elves, and together the three forces stood at Mount Hyjal, fighting the fury of Archimonde, Lord of the Burning Legion. It was there that Archimonde fell, though at the cost of many lives from every race. The Legion retreated in the aftermath, and for a brief time, there was peace. Okay. Thrall founded the city of Orgrimmar, named after Orgrim Doomhammer, and the valleys of Durotar, named after his noble father Durotan. Jaina of the humans and Malfurion of the Night Elves allowed the Horde to live in peace, and Tauren constructed on their own city for the first time, Thunderbluff in Mulgore. It was not long before tensions rose again, however. Admiral Daelin Proudmoore, one of the leaders of the Alliance of the Second War, came to find his daughter Jaina in spite of her protests. He launched assault after assault on the orcs until Jaina was forced to aid the Horde against her father. Thrall honored her sacrifice by sparing those loyal to her within her city of Theramore, but the battle proved to many that lasting peace between the Alliance and the Horde was impossible. More and more battles sprung up in spite of the efforts of both leaders to keep diplomatic relations strong. When the Naga emerged from the sea and attacked both human and orc cities, each side blamed the opposing faction, and so things grew worse and worse. Back in Lordaeron, Sylvanas Windrunner, a banshee and former ranger general of Quel'Thalas, broke free of Arthas' control and created her own undead faction, the Forsaken. As the situation in Kalimdor grew bloodier, Sylvanas offered an alliance to Thrall, which he grudgingly accepted. The introduction of the undead to the Horde infuriated the alliance further. While Jaina still did her best to stop the fighting, the humans in Stormwind took action against the Horde again, and the situation deteriorated. More recently, Thrall has been in communication with the Revantusk forest trolls, who agreed to a tentative alliance with the Horde. That pretty much brings us up to date, sadly. Jaina and Thrall continue to communicate, but it seems the Fourth War may be on the horizon. And that does bring us up to date on Chill Classic. What I think would be super cool, and I do not know if we're going to get it, is if we could have like a recap of this that just recapped all of the lore elements of what happened in Classic, and so on and so forth. We might not get that in a book, but we might get that on the website in the story thus far. When we will eventually do that. But that would be cool. Okay, so that was a doozy, like I said, but we have another episode in the pipe. 5x5. Thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this recap of the Horde's history and this episode of Lore of Warcraft.